Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We're super excited that you decided to join us for today's episode of the show. And today on the podcast, we are very excited to be joined by Liz Sharma. And Liz is the founder of Talk the Streets, where she teaches people how to speak Portuguese. Liz is originally from England, but now calls Lisbon, Portugal home. And so on this episode of the podcast, we are talking about why Lisbon is an amazing city to base yourself as a digital nomad. We talk about learning Portuguese and the importance of that as a traveler, especially if you're going to a country like Portugal. We talk about what it's been like over the last couple of months with the pandemic, how Liz has been able to shift her business online, and so much more.
Yeah, and it's been a long time since we've traveled in Europe and since we visited Portugal. So it definitely made us think about the next time we want to get over there and start planning about when we might be able to make a new Portugal trip happen. If you're interested in learning Portuguese, make sure to go check out talkthestreets.com and Liz's course, Become a Portuguese Pro. And one more thing before we get into the interview, and that's a reminder about the World Wanderers Insider, which is available on our Patreon community. So if you're interested in traveling and working, we've got lots of great episodes around that topic recently. So we talked to Madison Canna about learning programming and how the opportunities that are around that could be great for a nomad, as well as on travel blogging with Cam and Natasha from The World Pursuit, and lots more. So if you want to check that out, you can go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers and find out everything about the World Wanderers Insider. And now on to the interview with Liz.
Welcome to the podcast today, Liz. We're super excited to have you here with us.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, and where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from Lisbon, Portugal.
Amazing. I'm definitely feeling the desire to travel right about now, and that sounds pretty magical to me. And I know we're going to talk a lot about Portugal and what it's like to be there as a nomad and all that good stuff. But before we get there, let's back up a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your travel story and why you decided to start traveling?
Sure, yeah. Well, I studied Spanish at school, and I was actually one of those people who liked it. And that's kind of when my passion for languages and travel started, really. I remember going on the first trip to Barcelona when I was 16, and I was like, yes, this is absolutely what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. So that's where it kind of sort of sowed the seed. And then all throughout my 20s, I worked for a PR agency, and we focused on global development issues. So I was lucky enough to go pretty much all four corners of the world with that job. So whether it was in the field in Africa or at policy events in the Middle East and South America. So I really started to get used to kind of traveling and working because the whole team was constantly traveling. We were a small team, so we quickly got used to kind of working remotely. We built up a lot of trust and processes to make that efficient. So that's when I started to realize, like, okay, you can work online and kind of be anywhere. So that's how I kind of moved into that side of things.
And then was the move to Portugal kind of right around that time as well when you were transitioning career-wise, or did that happen a bit after?
So the transition to Portugal was always more of an attraction to Portugal itself rather than a nomad journey. Lots of nomads are here, but for me, it was always kind of like my end goal to kind of get to Portugal because I had studied at a university. So I'd done sort of Spanish at school, and then I saw that lots of universities offered Portuguese as well. And I was like, well, that sounds cool. Sounds a bit more niche, more interesting. So I did that. And then it was kind of that passion for Portuguese that actually led me to Portugal, because I basically just fell in love with the language and the country, which is very easily done if you ever come here. So that's how I sort of ended up gravitating towards Portugal.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. We traveled to Portugal just once back in 2011, and I think we spent close to a month there, and it was amazing. I think Ryan and I have both been just kind of anxious to get back ever since then. And it's, going on 9 years now that we haven't been there. And it just seems like such an amazing country to live in. And I'd be curious to know kind of what it was like when you moved there, like what it was like to learn Portuguese and kind of dive into the culture there.
Yeah, so I guess that really started at university when I sort of started to discover more about the language and the culture. Because I had picked it up thinking it was something that was a bit niche, but then obviously I realized it's actually the sixth most widely spoken language in the world. So it's a really, really kind of important language. But when I went to get my books at the academic bookstore, they were filed under miscellaneous languages. And I was like, what? This is a super important language. Why isn't it kind of getting more recognition? So for me, that was the signal. I was like, right, I need to make this, more heard of and get people more excited about this. So I'm one of those people that has to take on extra projects all the time. So I decided to start a Portuguese society at university. And so through that, I organised a trip to Portugal. So that was actually the first time that I went to Portugal. That was back in 2006. And we went to Porto. And that was when I properly fell in love. And I was like, right, I need to come back. So then I went on to do my Erasmus in Portugal. And actually, so many people that I meet here did their Erasmus here as well. It's definitely one of those countries that totally steals your heart. And people either stay or end up finding a way back, and that's what I did. So sort of fast forward back to 2015. I've been kind of working in London for several years, and it got to be a bit of a struggle, the fast-paced life there. And so again, I just started dreaming of Portugal again, and I was like, okay, maybe I could make this work. So when I came in 2015, it was very much kind of like dipping my toe back in to see how, because I'm a London girl, and if you're a city person, especially if you're from London, I think you imagine that you couldn't possibly live anywhere else because London has everything. And so it was really like, okay, what would it be like to live in a smaller city? But when I came, I saw that there was just so much going on. There was such a lively, community. There were bars popping up on the rooftops of car parks, and all this cool stuff was going on at that time, and it just felt like a really, really exciting place to be. So it took another couple of years for me to kind of work things out to move more permanently, but it definitely felt at the time a really, just a really exciting place to be. It was so different and such a welcome change from London.
Yeah, I can imagine. It seems like, although Portugal is it kind of depends if you look at just on a map, not the biggest country, but a fairly historically important country. Lots of people live in Portugal, but it's kind of a country that you almost forget about sometimes, because it's beside Spain and France and Germany, or you think of so much more, and you hear about so much more in the news, you kind of forget about it. But yeah, just so much depth and so much cool stuff going on. And just one question, you mentioned you went for your Erasmus, and I know I've heard this word before talking to people. Can you remind us, especially for North Americans, what Erasmus is?
Yeah, of course. Erasmus is the exchange program that universities in Europe do. So it's actually really common for kind of kids in university to, no matter what they're studying, to go and do a semester abroad. And the Erasmus scheme essentially funds that. It's not so common for Brits to do it. It's usually kids who are studying languages who would do Erasmus. So because I was studying Spanish and Portuguese, it was actually kind of like a prerequisite for my actual course. But it's just wild because it's like they're saying to you, guys, you don't have to do anything this semester, just be in another country and experience another culture and have fun. And that's literally the objective. And I just think that's such a nice thing. because I think the requirements were to attend 75% of my classes and sit the exams. Like, I didn't actually have to do particularly well at them, which I still did because I'm a girly spot, so I had to do well in the exams anyway. But it's just such a nice experience doing Erasmus, and I think it's something that really sticks with people who do it.
Yeah, it's something I think both of us, Matt and I, going back to our university experience, feel like that would have been something that would have added a ton of value to it. And there's so many options, so many cool things you can do in regards to exploring the world that you can take advantage of. I remember we both went to business school here in Canada, and it'd be funny because there'd be transfer students, people who are there on their semester abroad. And the way it would work was if you got, I think it was higher than a D. So like if you got a C minus, it all was the same. It was just pass fail. And so there'd always be like case studies and group projects and stuff. And when you get put in with like a foreign exchange student, like someone from like New Zealand or Australia, you're like, okay, they're probably not going to pull their weight because they're just trying to get a C minus. But one follow-up question. So you grew up obviously speaking English, learning Spanish. I'm not sure if you had any other languages, but what was it about Portuguese that kind of that had that like magic that really drew you in?
It's a good question. I think it goes back to this idea of like it being slightly underrated. And I totally agree with what you said about Portugal kind of getting a bit forgotten because it's next to, a noisy neighbor of Spain, and everybody knows so much about Spanish culture. And I think that was what really captivated me about Portuguese and Portugal itself, because when I came here, particularly for my Erasmus, it just had so much character and history, and it was such a kind and welcoming place. And I was like, why don't more people know about this? So obviously the more I studied, the more I realized that it's actually only, I think it's a very small percentage of people who speak Portuguese actually live in Portugal, because there are several other countries, obviously Brazil being the biggest, and other places in Africa that speak Portuguese. So it just became something that was, a little bit different and special. And I just absolutely loved immersing myself in the culture. And I think that's also something that the Portuguese feel, especially when I was younger and a student, it was cool that people were coming and wanting to learn Portuguese and wanting to understand kind of more about the culture and history. I just think it's just so special.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I think there's something really amazing about finding a country and a language that you really connect to that doesn't feel like it's, the same thing that everyone else is learning. And like you said, I mean, Portuguese is a very relevant language in the world. And I think even for us, we've traveled through Europe and we've traveled through South America, and if you know Spanish, it's like you can kind of sort of get by a little bit, especially like Spanish second language speaker. I should fully clarify that. And you can get by a little bit, but I've always been really intrigued by the flow of the language and just the sounds and stuff. It's a really beautiful language to listen to.
Yeah, and I think that's, speaking Spanish can be a great help, but it can also be a great hindrance because there's a lot that is the same. But then there is a very specific percentage that is different, and it's that percentage that's going to kind of trip you up some of the time. It can be quite kind of hard to drop the accent, especially if you learn Spanish first. You come to the language with all these assumptions about how you would pronounce things, and particularly the European Portuguese pronunciation is very different. It's kind of, I don't know if you've heard European Portuguese so much, but it's quite closed, it's quite swallowed, and people have a hard time, understanding that. Whereas the Brazilian Portuguese is kind of much more open and is easier to follow, particularly if you're a Spanish speaker.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that we're curious about is, what is day-to-day life like in Portugal?
Day-to-day life in Portugal is chill. And I think that's what attracts people to it. I think that people here have their priorities straight in terms of enjoying the simple things. So being around your family, connecting over food, spending weekends at the beach, having a beer at the end of the day. And I think when you come from fast-paced places like London, or my partner who's from New York, when you come from places like that to somewhere where those are the priorities, it's very easy to kind of think, yeah, this is where I want to stay. And on the flip side of that, there is a kind of really thriving digital nomad startup scene. Lots of entrepreneurs are here, so it's also really exciting to be able to connect with other people like that. And I call it Erasmus for grown-ups. It's really, really nice to connect with kind of like-minded people who've been attracted to Portugal because of those things.
Yeah, and what do you think it is about, it seems like Lisbon in particular, that attracts those entrepreneurs, those nomads, people from all around the world who have traveled a ton, but then kind of want to base themselves in Lisbon?
Yeah, they actually call Lisbon the place where digital nomads come to die. So people, set off on the digital nomad dream. Looking again, it's for the lifestyle, right? People want a more chilled out pace of life. They want sunshine, beaches, and adventure. And Lisbon has all of that, and it's also within Europe. So if you're from the UK or France or even the US, it's still really easy to get home when you want to. So I think that it also has a lot to do with the 300 days of sunshine that we get a year as well.
300 days of sunshine sounds so amazing for us Canadians over here. I feel like we get like 300 days of snow.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I struggle with when I do go back to the UK. We usually go back for kind of December time around Christmas, and a few weeks without seeing the sun, you start to realize how much you've become accustomed to life in Portugal, where you can just on any given day have a blue sky, which always lifts the mood, I think.
For sure. Yeah. One of those things that is so nice when you get it, but is easy to forget about how much of a luxury it is, for sure. And so what's the cost of living like for Lisbon, for example? What's like a cost of an apartment, a meal out, and that type of thing?
So it's a good question. I mean, I think much like other cities, you can see two economies. And I think that the arrival of the digital nomad scene and also, other expats did drive up the cost of a lot of things for a while. Of course, coronavirus has put a dampener on all of that. So, rents and things have dropped drastically. When I arrived, you could get a really great room in a city centre apartment for €300 or €400. Then per month, and then sort of as things sort of spiraled out of control slightly in kind of 2018, 2019, you were looking at probably at least €600. So I think in comparison to other European places, it was still very affordable. But of course, that did create problems because it conflicted quite drastically with the local economy, where, salaries are much lower. So you would see kind of Airbnbs that were being rented out for 3 or 4 times the local salary, which of course wasn't fair. So I'm interested to see what happens after the kind of pandemic clears up, because I think that it has shown the government that they've been slightly too reliant on kind of foreigners for kind of income for the country. So prioritizing local people again, I think will become more of a priority, but we'll have to see. But of course, with the pandemic, everything has kind of dropped really in price here. But on a normal kind of occasion, again, it is the cost of living that really attracts people here. So you can go out and have an amazing seafood meal by the beach with a glass of white wine, and you wouldn't have to spend, more than 20 euros and have a view of the beach and things like that. So it is still definitely for things like food and entertainment, it's still a very affordable place to be.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I'm curious for people who are listening, there's lots of people who are nomadic or who travel quite a bit listening. How important is it that they speak Portuguese when they arrive in Portugal or to learn Portuguese when you're in Portugal?
It's a good question because, of course, you can get by without speaking Portuguese. But I think that it is really important to try. Like I say, not because you wouldn't be able to get around, particularly if you lived in Lisbon, people do generally speak very good Portuguese. But to really get under the skin of a place and to kind of connect with local people, you have to speak the language. So I think if you're passing through, and then you would absolutely survive on your English, not a problem. It's a very open city in that regard. But if you're thinking of doing slower travel, slow nomading, or sticking around for a longer period of time, then I think learning the language is really, really key, because it's something that I noticed about moving here as somebody who did speak fluent Portuguese. I was able to quickly build really strong relationships with my neighbours, read about new bars, and really quickly start navigating things like buying a house and finding, trusted contractors and things like that. And those things are just so much more of a struggle if you can't speak Portuguese. And I think you will just end up having a much richer experience here if you do give it a try.
Yeah. We've often talked about too, especially if you're going to spend a little bit longer in a place, like the experience of learning a language while you're there just makes it feel so much more open, so much more comfortable. And I feel like just having that chance to like engage so much more with what's around you instead of kind of feeling like an outsider all the time makes it such a better experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's totally, there definitely is an expat bubble here. And if you didn't want to, you don't have to go outside of it. But for me, I think that that's where the magic happens. I really think that there's, so much else of Portugal to discover as well outside Lisbon. It is a very, relatively small country to get around. So, in a couple of hours, you can be in the Duro Valley, the wine growing region, or in a couple of hours south, you can be down on the coast, and in the smaller places, that's where you would probably struggle if you didn't have any Portuguese. But like I say, I think those are some of the most kind of exciting and magical kind of places to discover in Portugal.
Yeah, I think we can definitely relate to that just from spending a lot of time in Spanish-speaking Latin America, particularly Mexico, and then other countries like Guatemala and Panama, where we've been able to, as our Spanish has become more advanced, do things that require you to speak the language. And I feel like that allows us to kind of separate ourselves from more of the touristic activities and kind of dive deeper into the culture and get to know people who maybe don't speak English. And I think, when we were first in Mexico, we met a lot of other expats, like English speaking expats. And my language teacher would always be like, "Oh, did you practice Spanish with them?" And I'm like, "Well, why would like two Canadians and two Americans practice Spanish together? It's just easier for us to speak in English." But the more you learn, it's like you can kind of break through the culture a little bit more, and you kind of feel like you're more actually a part of that country, which I think is a really cool experience to have in a country that's not your home country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also goes back to being kind of a responsible citizen of a place, right? If you're sticking around and you do want to stay for a bit longer, then I think that there's also something, I think that you will gain greater respect from people if you are at least having a go. And that's what I tell my students anyway, like, just have a go. And people will be, of course there'll be some people who just switch to English, but there will be plenty of people whose eyes will kind of light up that you've tried, and will see you in a completely different light if you're giving it a go.
Yeah. And so, Liz, you work with lots of people who are learning Portuguese and have a course on it. for someone who's completely new and maybe doesn't even have any second language experience, what's kind of like the best way to start learning Portuguese, and I suppose any language?
Oh, that's a good question. Starting speaking from day one and not worrying about looking like a fool. I think that that's something that we find really hard as adults, because we're kind of just used to adulting around the place and knowing what we're doing. And I think that when you're put in a situation where you can't speak the language, we suddenly regress to that feeling of when we're a child and not wanting to be embarrassed and to say anything wrong. But really the only, there's no way around that. The only way is through it. And I think that the most positive thing that you can do when you're trying to learn a language is just to start speaking straight away. So whether you are just kind of mastering a few practical phrases about, please, thank you, excuse me, can I have a coffee, all of these things, that's where everybody starts. And then, you just kind of gaining confidence from there. So the three things that I usually focus on when I teach are pronunciation, because that is the kind of foundation for being able to speak, and also to be understood and to understood other people when they're speaking to you. Also trying to focus on the way people speak in real life, because I know that most language courses that you do, they won't, they'll teach you in a certain way, and then you'll get out onto the street and be like, okay, well, that doesn't sound like anything that I learned in my class. So I think, paying attention to that as well, and trying to, really understand how people speak on a day-to-day basis, rather than something that is very, rehearsed from a textbook. And then, of course, the third thing is that you do need grammar. So there are a lot of brilliant apps out there now that you can use that will kind of talk you through vocabulary and practical phrases, but it doesn't really give you the kind of building blocks that you need to actually form your own sentences. So I think alongside things like those apps, you do need to be looking at some grammar as well, but not too much to get yourself overwhelmed, because you're not trying to get a university degree in this like I did. You just need the kind of basics to be able to start formulating your own sentences and your own conversations.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think that's it's definitely an important thing to be considering as we're traveling, I think.
And so just to follow up a little bit earlier, you talked about a few other places in Portugal that you mentioned as kind of destinations. Are there any other cities that outside of Lisbon people should think about as potential places to settle down, to spend a longer period of time?
Good question. So in terms of visiting, I definitely have absolute favorites for places that I like to go to get away. So places like the Alentejo, which is the western coast on the way down to the Algarve. Most people just drive through that and go straight down to the Algarve. Everybody knows about the beaches down there. But the Alentejo is actually really, really beautiful and so much quieter. And it's where the Portuguese go on their holidays. So it's very kind of authentic, a really, really kind of truly Portuguese experience. And if you go inland, there are tons and tons of rural little retreats that you can go to really kind of get away from everything. So that's one of my favorite places to visit for sure. And then in the north, I mentioned as well the Duro Valley, the wine growing region. That is such a treat of just rolling hills and sunshine and winery after winery, and you just spend the day jumping between those before having a really nice dinner with more wine. So there are so many places to discover. I love being in Lisbon for the kind of more city life, and then it's really easy to get to those places, so even in 2-3 hours, or you could go as little as 45 minutes out to Sintra, which is also on the coast, and it's really magical because it has a slightly different climate. It's a bit it has forest, and it's a bit foggier and cooler, and there are like stunning palaces around there, and forests to walk through, amazing seafood by the beach. So there are so many places around. I love having Lisbon as my jumping off point for all of those. So in terms of places to settle down, Porto is also becoming really popular. But I would say in terms of, apart from retired folk who are doing things for a different reason, I would say that most people are concentrated kind of in the digital nomad scene in Lisbon and Porto.
Yeah, for sure. It's just making me more and more want to come back to Portugal, because we only visited, I think, Lisbon and then the south, like the Algarve area, and both were amazing. We loved both. I think it was immediately somewhere we were like, yes, we could just stay here forever. But, our trip took us onwards. And so one of the things I'm curious about is how Lisbon, particularly in Portugal in general, has changed over the last couple of years as there's been more and more nomads living there.
Yeah, it's a good question. It definitely has changed a lot. And like most things, I think there's kind of two sides to kind of every story. So Portugal was hit really hard by the financial crisis back in 2008. Austerity measures were put in place that were really kind of punishing for the people, and they just didn't work. So when the government changed, one of the strategies to kind of climb out of that recession was to open up to foreigners and to attract investment and attract people to come and live here with golden visas and other tax incentives, which is also a lot to do with why a lot of nomads come and set up here. So this has gone a long way to helping Portugal get back on its feet. There's definitely like a lot of development, like areas of the city have been totally kind of cleaned up and renovated, and there's more opportunity. But then, of course, the flip side of that is what I was mentioning before. The rent in the city centre rose astronomically. Before COVID hit, it was really quite crazy. You would see flats for rent that were several times the average Portuguese salary. And it just became a really tense situation, which you see in kind of any area that is kind of deemed up and coming. I was living in Hackney in London before this, and the exact same thing was kind of happening there. So that was definitely a trajectory that the country went on quite rapidly from kind of 2015 to 2018. So you did see, the fancy brunch places cropping up, and more fancy hotels and more fancy flats with swimming pools on the roof, and you think to yourself, like, is this really what the kind of the Portuguese people need? So, as I say, because of the pandemic, that's kind of all put a bit of a halt on that. So now it's definitely going to be the case to see what happens. I'm hoping that the city will move towards a bit more of a balanced approach, where it can look after its own residents as well. But I mean, from our side, I'm one of these foreigners that's in Portugal. I think that we just have to be kind of sensible, and just contribute in a positive way to the community and to the country. And one of those things is learning the language, like we've mentioned before. But there really is so much to kind of see and enjoy here, and I do think that the Portuguese government want you to they want you to see that, they want you to be here, they want you to come. So I don't think that should put anybody off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it kind of as well, something that a lot of nomads and others like is that sense of exploration. And so we kind of find that, once certain areas become super popular, it starts that process of looking for other areas. And I think, it's definitely challenging. You see it kind of all around the world as these kind of initial wave of nomad hubs have, well, the kind of advantage they presented was it was a form of arbitrage where you could make the type of living you could make in London or New York or wherever it may be, and live somewhere like Lisbon or Mexico City or Medellin, Colombia, and your cost of living was so much less. But as more and more people who have that income move there, the cost of living inevitably rises, which creates, like you said, so many kind of social challenges along with it. So it's definitely an interesting balance and something that I think we're still trying to figure out as we're like moving into whatever the second decade of this as a real major trend and more people who live globally.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see more and more distributed working now. I mean, the pandemic has shown us that people can work from home and do it effectively. So one of the things that I will be really interested to see is that, can we use this for positive change, and can we start to populate areas that do need regeneration? Because to regenerate a place, you need people there, you need people spending money, you need to kind of kickstart an economy. And I think that there is potential to do that in places that have been neglected. And there are certainly other areas in Portugal that would benefit from that. And I think that it will be really interesting to see if we're able to kind of make that happen, and to not concentrate all of the wealth and the development in Lisbon, but distribute that into other areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we kind of mentioned a bit about the pandemic. Have you been in Portugal throughout the entire COVID pandemic?
Yeah.
What's it been like? What has kind of the experience been like?
Well, Portugal, I think, has had significantly lower numbers than the rest of Europe. I think that the government did react pretty quickly. I think it was, clear, because we saw kind of what happened in Italy and Spain. I think that the Portuguese government just knew that the health system would not be able to cope. So I think they acted pretty decisively in putting in a lockdown. And so because of that, I think that we have come through it probably better than other European countries. However, it, of course, has been really difficult and really sad to see the impact. I mentioned areas that were thriving and that were really had a lot of investment and up and coming, and now you walk through those areas and you do see more homeless people, you do see more suffering. So it is definitely something that has hit Portugal hard, because it also relies so heavily on tourism. And obviously nobody could come. The UK allowed people in for a very short period of time, but then you had to quarantine again on your return. So people weren't coming to Portugal for their holidays; they were going to Spain and France instead, and that will have had a massive impact on the economy here. So. In terms of my day-to-day life, I'm very lucky. I have my apartment, and we were able to work online. The sun came out, and once lockdown lifted, we were able to go for walks and go to the beach and that kind of thing. So there are definitely worse places to kind of ride out this particular storm, but I don't think Portugal is going to escape unscathed, purely because it does rely so much on tourism. And so this summer will have been kind of really brutal for those people working in that industry. And now we're heading towards winter, and numbers are going up again, and there's talk of kind of more lockdowns in other places in Europe. I don't know if Portugal can survive another lockdown. So I think that the government will try and do kind of all it can to prevent that. So we're still in a state where you can have only groups of 10 people, and a few more restrictions around openings of kind of bars and restaurants. And we're just trying to make sure everybody sticks to that, so that we can stabilize the number of cases again. But I think that, as I say, for our day-to-day life, we've been able to, carry on. We can go out for dinner, we can go for nice walks along the beach and things like that. So, in terms of our personal day-to-day life, it hasn't been too terrible. But for the country as a whole and for the economy, it's been pretty bad.
And does it seem like now that we're getting to fall, that some of the nomads who maybe had left earlier on are coming back, or what does it kind of feel like in the city?
So Lisbon's definitely very seasonal in terms of its nomads. People tend to come sort of April time and leave around October time. So those are definitely the peak months in Portugal, because of course it's when we have all of our fabulous sunshine. So people usually tend to start clearing out at this time of year anyway. So, with travel restrictions, I don't know how that's going to go this time, but of course it has felt so much quieter this summer because, not as many people have been able to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were just looking at each other, and I feel like spending that type of time there would be pretty amazing. But I imagine, what is winter like in Portugal? Because, we're coming from Canada, and I feel like for me, anything that's warmer than Canada is kind of a win for me.
Well, you say that, and people have this idea that winter will be warmer in Portugal, and the truth is it is. We don't get super low temperatures. We get to around kind of like 9 or 10 degrees. It's cold here. The problem is that houses aren't heated in Portugal. So in the wintertime, you will probably find yourself colder inside than outside. So unless you find the right accommodation that has heating and other cozy things, it's not the best place to have winter. So my place, I did put heating in. We have an electric blanket, and so I've got all of the gear to make sure that we're not freezing. But I mean, it's happening now. It's so weird because in Portugal we don't really have as quite defined seasons as we do in the UK, where I'm really used to the kind of nights drawing in and it getting a bit chilly, and autumn is a thing. Whereas here, we are having crazy 32-degree heat in the beginning of September, and by the end of September, you're under the duvet shivering. So it's not the most ideal place in winter unless you can make sure that you've got good heating. But in practical terms, I mean, it's still sunny here until November. It's just a case that you get chilly inside if you don't have that heating going.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. We lived in an apartment in Mexico City from over winter, and Mexico City actually gets quite chilly, and our apartment didn't have any heating, and it was a concrete building. And so we had a little space heater. And I remember being I can't believe I'm using a space heater and woolly socks in Mexico. This just feels so weird, but it's just because if you were in the sun, you were totally fine, kind of in a t-shirt and pants, or maybe a light jacket, same type of temperatures, but inside the apartment would just be quite chilly.
Yeah, exactly. I've been out I remember my parents visiting one November, and we were out and about, and I was just wearing a vest top with catching all my rays still, and I was like, this is great. So yeah, that's exactly that. When you're in the sun, lovely. When you're out of the sun and you're inside, can get pretty chilly. But that's why I like to go back to the UK for Christmas anyway, because it's nice and Christmassy, and we have central heating that I don't have to feel bad about turning up.
Nice. I love it. And so we talked a little bit about the pandemic and what it's been like in Portugal, but I'm curious what it's been like for you with your business. What has it been like kind of shifting all of your work totally remotely over the last, I guess, 6-7 months?
Yeah, so when I started teaching Portuguese over a year ago now, I had always planned in my head that I would kind of bring it online and do online courses. But then, of course, when the pandemic hit, I was like, okay, it's now I have to do this. So I went from kind of teaching workshops in co-works and teaching in small groups to doing everything purely online. So that was definitely a learning curve. I had to get an email list sorted out, and I started a YouTube channel so that people would kind of find me. And I have to say that because people were kind of stuck at home with time on their hands, I think they were starting to Google, how do I learn Portuguese? And so that's where I, started showing up in YouTube, particularly because not a lot of people on YouTube are focused on European Portuguese. They're mostly Brazilian Portuguese, because of course it's a much bigger country, much more people learning that variant of the language. So it took off really quickly. I was amazed. I started with 176 subscribers back in March, and I'm just about to hit 5,500 in what seems like quite a short space of time. Once I had that kind of following starting to happen on YouTube, I was doing sort of live lessons on a Thursday night from my little office, which was really fun. And then I saw, I had people tuning in from all over the world, and there really was this kind of demand for what I was doing. So it was just really, really exciting to see. And then from there, I decided to do like a pilot version of an online program where people could learn Portuguese with me. And then I just opened the doors to that as an official program earlier this month. So now I have students from all over the world. Before I was kind of limited to people that were here, in Portugal already. And then when I started this kind of online business, I was able to see that actually there are so many people who are thinking of relocating here or retiring here, who aren't here yet, but really want to use this time before they get here to really invest in learning. It's everything has happened at a crazy fast speed because the coronavirus pandemic sort of forced it to be that way. But I'm really, really lucky that I have seen so much interest for it, and that the channel in particular is growing so quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so if people want to go start learning Portuguese and start learning about what life could be like in Lisbon and watching on YouTube, where should they go to find you?
So you will find me on YouTube, youtube.com/talk the streets. So like walk the streets, but talking. So that's the name of my brand. So that's where you will find me.
Amazing. And where can people go to find your programs and that type of thing if they want to learn with you?
So my website is talkthestreets.com. And then if you want to find out about the program itself, it's called Portuguese Pro. So if you go to talkthestreets.com/pro, PRO, that's where you'll find the information to apply.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation, Liz. You've definitely convinced us that we need to get to Portugal ASAP. And it's just been amazing to hear how things are there and what it's been like for you to learn Portuguese and turn this into a business. So thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I hope to see you here sometime soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanders Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.